Welcome back to another episode of the Heatio Home Energy Show, where I'm joined again by Tom Coverdale, Head of Design at EBAC. And in our previous episode, we talked a lot about the journey that EBAC went on. I'm just going to, for anybody who hasn't seen that yet, I would strongly advise going back and watching it. We talked how it came from chicken shed to fully accredited heat pump manufacturer, washing machines, coolers, dehumidifiers. That journey in itself was massively impressive, along with the fact you're a UK-based manufacturer, your journey getting into the industry and where you're at today and the ambitions to stand toe-to-toe with some of the big names in the industry. So in this episode, really want to get into some of the, from a manufacturer's perspective, some of the challenges that are facing UK homeowners to adopt technologies. We, under this show and with the clips that we put on our social media, we get plenty of grief from gas engineers in the UK that maybe hear the rhetoric that goes on around heat pump systems, and there is plenty of negativity. There's plenty of positive stories, but unfortunately probably don't get as much publicity as the negative ones as most bad press does. So I really want to kind of start at that starting point of we see a lot of manufacturers that come into the UK, and I think maybe there was an element of the precedent getting set from more Scandinavian manufacturers that the only way to design a heat pump system is 35 degrees, and the UK housing stock is not suitable for that. Therefore, heat pumps are not suitable for the UK economy. And my thought process on that has always been that from the manufacturers in Scandinavia, when the rhetoric was that we should design our systems to 35 degrees flow temperature, which for anybody watching, boilers operate at kind of anywhere between 60 to 80 degrees when they're in space heating mode. So a huge change in operating temperatures. And when you drop those temperatures down, naturally, you need more ways of getting heat into that property. And we typically do that by having bigger radiators in the homes. In Scandinavia, the way they do that is they have really, really well insulated homes, but they also have really, really low costs of electricity in comparison to what we have in the UK. So it kind of makes sense to go down that route in those countries. Whereas in the UK, we have a kind of a unique set of challenges. And we've got homes that will fit, 80% of our homes on the gas network. We've got the relative cost between gas and electricity, which creates a challenge. So even an efficient designed heat pump system will run slightly better than gas prices. It all comes down to how much you spend. The more you spend on upgrading your system, the more efficient it will become. And we have 80% of the homes on our gas network have combi boilers. So they produce instant hot water, so we don't have hot water storage. And it's always interesting. We get people on this show from different walks of life and different opinions on this topic. And I just wanted to hear from you, really. What do you see in your ideal world? What do you see the journey being for a consumer?
So I'd like to refer to the car industry as a bit of an analogy. I think that to get people to switch from fuel, petrol and diesel, to electric, maybe not so much now, but certainly when electric cars first came on the scene, was very difficult because it was compromise, and consumers don't like compromise. So, for example, I live out in the sticks pretty much. There hasn't been, it's starting to take shape now, but it hasn't been a good infrastructure for electric. So for me to move from petrol or diesel to fully electric was tough. So hybrid was a perfect solution. You get the best of both. You can charge your car up and get 30-mile range, get you to work and back, and you've got the petrol there if you want to extend your journey. You don't have to worry about having to stop and charge and so on and so on. So I think that was a nice transition for people to start getting on board. And I think heat pumps should be exactly the same. You refer to combi boilers and not having hot water cylinders. Well, wouldn't it be utopia to have a heat pump doing heating for 90% of the year and having the ability to talk to the boiler from a bivalent perspective and to actually use the boiler for those periods where heat pumps perhaps struggling, or there's a demand for heat that needs is quick. You've been on holiday and you want to heat the house up quickly, you can put the boiler on for a period, and perhaps for the hot water.
Mm-hmm.
There's compromises, and it's easier for a consumer to adapt and to actually start making that transition, because once they've kind of accepted a heat pump and they've got working in tandem with a boiler, or perhaps they go the full transition. I just think that sometimes we will find reasons not to do things, and if we put those barriers in the way, and some of the incentive schemes don't encourage this, and some of the MCS stipulations aren't clear and perhaps don't allow this in some cases, I think if we can make it easy for the customer to transition, then we're more likely to get them on board. And if you know, if we carry on the route we're going, nothing changes, the money we're spending on the boiler upgrade scheme isn't working as well as it should be. That's obvious. Throw more money at it, I don't think it'll get the uptake it needs still. I don't think it's solely monetary. It's more about convenience for the customer and compromise. Mm-hmm. So if we got people to make a transition, we came up with some concept that was a hybrid or bivalent solution as the interim, people start that transition, then when the boiler does break down, they're more inclined to want to use a heat pump and continue to use a heat pump. Yeah. And you could actually phase that move to a heat pump over a number of years. Yeah. And it just makes an easier pill to swallow, because
it actually makes sense though. You know what I mean? If you were to, if you, outside of the industry barriers that prevent some of this stuff, if you were to incentivize the total cost of a hybrid installation, similar to the grant level that we get under the boiler upgrade scheme. So under the boiler upgrade scheme, for anybody that's watching that's not familiar with it, the boiler upgrade scheme requires an existing boiler to be removed, and a heat pump to be fitted in its place.
A renewable, yeah, that's right.
And the challenge that has is if a heat pump can't store hot water, for instance. So it has to have a storage capacity. And if you've got a combi boiler and you're, where maybe if you're in an older house where you did have a hot water storage system, maybe that's been replaced with a shower space now, or an ensuite or something like that, you now don't have the space to store the hot water. But if we were to incentivize a kind of hybrid solution where we had potentially even the full cost of a heat pump installation being covered, which I would imagine within the £7,500 that you get under the bus,
it's more than feasible.
Wouldn't it? If you were to just plumb it in alongside the boiler and say the heat pump will do everything it can, and the boiler will take over for hot water demand and anything it needs on top, and then educate the consumers that actually during that time will monitor the home. And that's one of the things that Heatio focus on, that kind of pre and post installation monitoring. So we can actually see, right, if you upgrade this radiator in this room, you can start to then drop that temperature down. You become more reliant on the heat pump. But you're giving them that option. Get used to it. Run the two systems side by side. But one of the things that we've seen more from the initial deployment of solar, and how solar customers are leading the way when it comes to being heat pump customers, is this gamification in the journey. Because you start off in this position of, I get my energy bill and I pay my direct debit, and I don't really know how many units of electricity I've used or when, or how many units of gas I've used or when. And then you get something like solar installed, and you get an app that shows you this stuff. And for a period of time, you become kind of engaged in how much you generate and how much you're consuming. And then what we see is people start to gamify that process themselves. Mm-hmm. How much can I use from solar without buying off the grid? And it becomes a bit of a game in the household to maximize it. And we're actually seeing it now with people who are even earlier in that journey. On our Flex platform, you can connect your smart meter and you can see your gas and electricity consumption without having any, smart solar technology or anything fitted, just a smart meter in your home. But if you can visualize that and you start gamifying that and the game is quite fun actually, because the game is, how much can I save on my energy bill? And when energy bills are as high as they are, it's a hell of a game to play.
Good reward, isn't it?
Yeah. And we see so if we go on that journey and they have, the solar is probably the easiest one and maybe the more common one. People put solar on the roof. There's some great deals out there for solar at the moment. They see that electricity consumption come down, but because they're monitoring their overall usage now they've, as Mick Wall said, they've used that kind of gateway drug and they're now aware of this thing. The next thing obviously is the gas consumption.
Yeah.
And if you, in a hybrid situation where you had a heat pump and a boiler, the gamification itself will incentivize people to try and consume more electricity because they're generating it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're on an innovative tariff, a smart tariff where they're paying less for electricity during certain periods of the day. So I think it's an incredible idea. If it's something we voiced to Ofgem, the administrators for the boiler upgrade scheme, to encourage them to consider this as an option, even if the grant was maybe slightly less. So there was still some contribution, so they weren't just being thrown into people's homes. But something like that feels like it would really be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think the utopic view or the utopic scenario is we get rid of fossil fuels completely, we move. But the reality is people aren't going to do that. And I think if we continue in the path that we're on now and people are hesitant, we'll be sitting here in a year's time and we won't have made a dent in our carbon footprint. We won't have achieved any of the targets we've set, which are unrealistic anyway, if we're being honest. And the 600,000 units a year is just it's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen unless we make change. So we've got to look at options, and I think that could be a real incentive to get if customers now, if we carry on the path when we get 35,000 units, if that done a year, it's not going to really have the impact. Well, it's not going to make the changes we need to make, not in our targets. If we introduce something like this, we might get a much higher uptake. We might have some chance of hitting our targets, or closer to them, should I say, at least. And those customers who have made the transition, who were previously hesitant, are now contributing less to carbon footprint because they use a renewable source for doing their heating for the majority of the winter when the conditions are favourable of heat pumps anyway. The average winter temperature is between 2 and 7. Mm-hmm. The heat pumps work perfectly fine there. For those odd days when I think it was something like 48 hours, I can't remember the exact stat, but it was 48 hours in the last 10 years or something that we were at minus 10. Yeah. Or some crazy stat like that. And we get hung up on those freak conditions. So we use a heat pump for the majority of the year and we start to make that change. We start to achieve our targets. And then, like you said before, if we gamify it, the next time a customer needs to replace the boiler, they'll find out in 2 years' time they might not even be using the boiler. They might have made the next step to get the heat pump fully ready, fully integrated, sorry. And by default, put the boiler out to the side. They're not using it anymore, and then they remove it next time it comes around.
And that's there's the kind of cherry on the cake moment when that boiler goes. It's not just the fact that you're not paying for gas; you're also not paying a gas standing charge.
Yeah.
So it's actually at that point when you have to make that critical decision. If the boiler's broken, heat pump's operating, what do I do now? Essentially for hot water demand. If you look at something like the SunAmp heat batteries, or even an inline electric water heater. Something that just gives you that hot water demand. I think one of the big factors that I do see coming up quite a bit, and I don't want to go too zeitgeist on this, but that seems like such an obvious thing to do that I kind of sit there sometimes and think, why the hell are we not doing that? Why is that not being incentivized?
I think because we're fixated on net zero, and ultimately that's where I want to be. But again, the reality is that we need to get consumers to buy into it before we can actually make it reality.
Well, hybrid cars are probably the greatest example, aren't they?
I think so. I think that's the best. Yeah,
it's a gap between maybe the early adopters and where the infrastructure is in place for fully electric, and the more traditional combustion engines, and I think there's a question around where people are in their, not just where they live, although I think that's a huge factor, but where they are in that adoption curve themselves. Yeah. And we've seen, I grew up in North Wales, but I moved back there for a few years. And the thought of having an electric vehicle where I lived, probably quite similar to yourself, it was just a non-starter. There was just not a possibility. But then so I was driving quite regularly. I was commuting to Manchester quite regularly. The train links were really poor. So I was doing a lot of driving. And the thought of doing that in anything other than a combustion engine just didn't really fit into the equation. I moved to Liverpool, and now, I mean, literally, the usage of my car is next to zero, to the point where I question even having it other than doing school runs. It is the ability to commute around the city, the ability to get to a train station, the ability to commute to other cities. It becomes close to the point where I would not even need a car. Never mind. Now, so I think regions and where you live plays a big part in some of those considerations. But with heat pump technology, you don't have that same issue, in that if you're connected to the gas network and you've got an electricity supply to your home, within reason, you could have a heat pump. But then we start looking at some of the, I'm going to call them zeitgeist elements, the bits where maybe it feels like there's bigger powers at play that are preventing some of this stuff coming forward. And a big one for me is a hybrid situation like that. That is a promotional moment choice for a consumer, in that you could say to them, you've got solar on your roof. How about we come along and fit a heat pump to your house? We'll have it done in about 48 hours, and you'll start consuming more electricity from your solar. You'll start consuming, we could maybe utilizing battery storage as well, and you'll also get access to innovative tariffs. And there may be a financial contribution, or maybe there isn't. And if that happens alongside the boiler, so you're not actually making a change in your circumstances. You've still got that fallback position if you don't like it. But if the boiler breaks and you've got to then make a decision for a heat pump, if your property isn't suitable, and by that could be the need for a change in your electricity supply to your home. We have customers who have something called a loop supply, which is where their supply comes in either to their house or the neighbour's house, and then it loops over. Properties have something called a cutout rating. And I know you know this stuff, and maybe for some of the audience at home that doesn't, they have a cutout rating, i.e. the amount of power that can go into the home, the amount of amps that can go into that property. If we need to upgrade that, then we need to call on the network operators to come out and do it, and some charge, some do it for free. But all of those things cause a delay. So if you're in the moment where your boiler's broken, and you say, I want a heat pump, and somebody turns around and says, it's going to be 8 weeks before we can upgrade the supply, you've got a problem. Whereas in a hybrid situation, you could actually fit it, maybe get approval because it's you're essentially going to be consuming at a lower amps, and then get that upgrade made. But that again seems too logical.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, well, we aim for perfection, don't we, with COPs, and we hung up on getting the optimum solution. So we've kind of got fixated on hitting this target number. Whereas I think a heat pump, if you need to replace your boiler and you need to upgrade your heating system, you're considering a heat pump. Rather than doing this utopic design for 35 or 40, 45 degree water flow, I think provision should be made to get towards that point, but you might choose to sacrifice some of the rooms and not replace the radiators in those rooms, so the customer doesn't have as much outlay up front. So it's a simple. It's like I said before, it's an easier pill to swallow, rather. Because
you're actually taking a customer on that journey. We touched on this a bit earlier in the chat we had before the show, where we've both been around in this industry long enough to have experienced the renewable heat incentive, and I know most of the heat pump engineers would have been involved in that scheme. It ran from 2014 till 2022. And the way that incentive was structured was directly calculated based on how efficient the system design was. So you got paid more money for the designing that system at a lower temperature. And at that time, the average price of an installation was extremely high, because everybody was chasing that super efficiency to maximize the grant they got. To the point where if you had the funds to do it, you could pretty much recoup the capital cost of having the installation over the 7 years of getting your incentive payments. So it kind of made sense. And that was probably the definition of chasing, the efficiency point or the seasonal coefficient of performance, as it's called. Now we've got boiler upgrade scheme that doesn't have those. You get the £7,500 as long as you design that system to a minimum efficiency. I think about 280%. You get the £7,500. The argument being, if you design it to 280% efficient, it's going to cost you more to run than it would a boiler. But at the same time, that kind of basic calculation of saying, well, a unit of gas compared to a unit of electricity, gas is about 3 times more expensive than a unit of electricity is about 3 times more expensive than a unit of gas. So you need at least 300% efficiency for this thing to make any sense. Yep. Less the fact that you've invested in the thing in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
But then when you take a step back from that, with innovative heat pump tariffs that are available, your actual per unit rate of electricity over the year is not 3 times more expensive than gas. If you've got solar and you're self-generating, then that again plays into it.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've seen periods even this year with with customers who are on Octopus Agile, where they've had periods of the day where they're actually being credited to take electricity off the grid. So I think this kind of rhetoric of 3-to-1 gas and electric, therefore minimum 300% efficiency. Actually, as a heat pump purist, it should be 400%, or it's not worth doing in the first place. I think that's changed. I don't think the messaging is changing, but I think it's got to change.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think there's other factors at play, and I think you bang on there. You can make use of other benefits that are out there to incentivize heat pumps, like the tariffs and things, and you can use electricity, certain surplus electricity. Exactly, you can in some cases get paid to use it. So why not? The only problem with a heat pump really is you can't really store the energy easily. So unless you have a sun amp, if you don't need heat, you don't need heat. Yeah, that's the only problem. If you don't get a cylinder, you haven't got anywhere to put that heat. So I think there are compromises, but I think if industry if we all change our mindset to encourage consumers to get on board, I'm pretty sure we could come up with some phased steps we could take to get there and actually make it an easier transition, basically. I keep using the word transition, but
it comes with innovation, doesn't it? What you guys have done at EBAC is innovation. We see things like Heat Geek. They brought out their mini store. It was they had a big stand that installed a show, and it had the kind of front and center was the mini store. What a fantastic innovation in that it can sit under a worktop. It gives you the hot water storage. It essentially turns your heat pump into a heat pump combi. You've then got products like the Sun Amp. It's a thermal battery where it can sit outside even, or they're developing versions where it can sit outside, but it's relatively small anyway, and it can fit into a kind of a small cupboard or a utility room if you've got one. So there is innovations come along, but it kind of feels like in order for them to really, really take off, you kind of need a bit of that innovative thinking from the engineers as well.
Yeah, I might be wrong here, but it feels like what Heat Geek have done, to some extent what we've done, we kind of, maybe it's just a natural way things happen, but you innovate and then you seek approval rather than sort of, I know we had the government incentive actually for innovation. So there was a government incentive, I think it was last year or maybe the year before, where there's a scheme for coming up with innovative measures. So I guess it is encouraged. It just feels like we've got to get the messaging better and get the...
Well, there seems fundamentally there's this block, isn't there, where we've got the people who want to go for it, and maybe as an industry, we've got a little bit of a hangover from the renewable heat incentive. So as engineers, heat pump engineers, systems are being designed only for, at those lower temperatures. And I think we need to adapt to that and maybe take the customer on a bit more of a longer journey. Then we've got the price point, which is a challenge. If you're going to be paying the same for a heat pump and your running costs are being perceived the same as a gas boiler, so you can pay the same for a gas boiler and your running costs are going to be perceived to be the same. It makes it a bit more challenging. But I think there was a study done by Energy Systems Catapult, and it was on a slightly different topic. It was called Heat as a Service, which was all around essentially removing the capital cost and wrapping it up in a service. But one thing that stood out to me from that report was the three things that they identified, which is if you can address the cost, the convenience, and the control, then you'll get mass market adoption. And that goes whether it's boilers, whether it's heat pumps. That is what people want. It needs to be cost effective, it needs to be convenient, and they need to be able to control it. And that's
just simple, isn't it? That's logical. Yeah.
Well, you went through, you touched on in the last show, and I think your point around the fact that this is why I chose EBAC is you live in the EBAC house. So, so you've got the EBAC
washing machine, dehumidifier, MVHR system, and a heat pump.
So MVHR, mechanical ventilation heat recoveries, that's circulating heat. No water cooler.
I don't know. No. I haven't really got room for a water cooler, to be fair. But if I could, I would.
And so your heat pump journey then, it sounds quite, from where we spoke about it, it sounds quite different to what maybe the traditional journey is at the moment for most homeowners. So just talk us through that.
Yeah, so my objective wasn't really to have an optimized heating system. I wasn't looking to replace the boiler at the time. I'm a big believer in living with what we produce and design, because if we live with it, or if I live with it rather, and I'm happy with how it functions and how it operates, then I can sort of be confident that when it goes out to the consumers and our customers, they get the best experience. So it's a bit of a part of our test and development. So my objective was just to put it in the property. Now, it just so happened, as soon as I took the pipes through the wall and the boiler saw that there was something coming into its space, it broke down. Couldn't ride it. It was middle of January this year. To be fair, it has been in the house since it was new, which is like an early 91 house. So the boiler's with my age. So the boiler broke down. So I had to kind of rush on Friday afternoon. I've got 2 young children. I had to rush and get the heat pump up and running. And my house has got everything you shouldn't do with the heat pump. It's got, I have got a cylinder, but it's not obviously a heat pump coil cylinder. It's quite, I'm not sure what it was back in the day, but it'll be high floor temperature design, 60, 70 degrees, whatever. Micro bore, shouldn't do micro bore.
No.
And conventional radiators. So everything really that goes against heat pumps. Now, you want to optimize it for better performance, no doubt about it. But where the perception of heat pumps don't work, I've disproven that, because I've bolted a heat pump on an existing water system. I haven't done anything that you probably should have done as a heating engineer, because I was in a distressed scenario. I could have got a new boiler, but I thought, I've got a heat pump sitting there, I've got 2 pipes to connect. I've done the wiring and everything else. I was about to connect it and run it as a bivalent system. Why not give it a go? And I ran it through January. I put a new boiler in maybe last month, because I wanted to run a bivalent and do some development there based on the conversation we're having now. I wanted to see if there's any opportunities. It's the house is warm. It's not as cheap as it could be, because the COP is not as good as it could be. But I could now have a strategic plan to upgrade radiators as I go, and actually upgrade the hot water cylinder, or just accept it's going to take long to do hot water and run it overnight or something on an agile tariff. Just accept some compromise somewhere. But it does what I needed to do. It heats the house and it heats the hot water. I've still got to do a Legionella cycle once a week with the immersion heater, or now with the boiler. It's just interesting how people perceive them as, you must insulate your property to make a heat pump viable. You must upgrade all your radiators, and you have to rip all your pipe work, because microbores are no. Yet heat loss is heat loss. If I'm losing 9 kilowatts out of that property, I've got 9 kilowatts to put back in. Whether I do that with electric, gas, or oil, it's 9 kilowatts.
Yeah.
Out of the 3 of those, I've got to choose the most efficient solution. So heat pump is the most efficient solution. So that's the insulation part of it. And then I've got to look at the actual hardware in the property, or the emitter side, and optimize it to get the most efficiency, or the best efficiency out of the heat pump.
Yeah.
That as a consumer, I think would be quite an easy stepped sort of approach to doing it.
I think so, especially, there's probably, as you say, I can imagine we'll have a combination of heat pump engineers reeling at the fact that you didn't do those upgrades, and then the flip side, you'll have a collection of boiler engineers saying, well, why didn't you just stick with the boiler? But I think there's one.
I'm a unique scenario. I've got a heat pump I want to test,
but you
and had a breakdown. So,
but you think in that scenario, if that breakdown, okay, there was a very, very unique scenario in the fact that as you were fitting the heat pump, the boiler broke down.
Yeah.
But actually, if that had happened, and you had a traditional bivalent system, and the boiler broke down, and the heat pump was running, you've actually got a backup.
I'd have the backup.
Yeah,
and I'd be on the path to where I ultimately need to be in 7 years' time.
Well, this is one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough. Energy security is a topic that does get talked about enough, but how that links to heat pumps, and I've commented back to a few of the gas engineers who kind of lay into us on social media, and the argument has been, when heat pumps are cheaper to run than a boiler, let me know. Until then, I'm going to carry on fitting boilers. And this isn't something that is being fitted today, and tomorrow you'll fit something else. This is if you're fitting a boiler now, you're essentially fitting the heating system for that home for the next 10 years, minimum.
Possibly, yeah. I was going to say, yeah.
And what you're actually in a way doing, if you don't flag to your customers that there is an alternative, and be aware that with energy security comes less reliance on fossil fuels. So if we're talking about making homeowners aware of what things could be like in the future, if the worst case scenario was they ended up in a situation where the running costs were the same as what they're facing now, but their energy security has been enhanced because every single step the UK is taking is to generate our own electricity, decarbonize our electricity, and move away from gas. And that can only mean one thing. Gas prices will go up.
Yep.
Electricity prices are and will come down. There will be a step change in the not too far distant future where electricity prices become incentivized and the levies and the taxes get taken away from electricity. I don't think that we put straight onto gas straight away, but there'll be a transition period. So if you were to be making people aware, just in the same way if you were buying a car, if you don't consider the other options of potentially a hybrid or fully electric, knowing the way fuel prices are going, then as the engineer going into that home, should you not make sure that your customer is aware of the other options?
Yeah. You should be, and you should be future-proof where possible, shouldn't you?
Because it's within the skill set of a heating engineer. It's not like they're going in and saying, you know what, you really should fit electric storage heaters, and I don't do them.
I think there's a reluctance. It's not difficult stuff. I mean, we make heat pumps this big, complicated,
beast of a thing.
Yeah, it's over-egged. I mean, first of all, it's a fridge. We've used fridge for decades. We've got fridge freezers, same principles. Yes, it uses a variable speed compressor. We can change the output, but it's refrigerant going around a circuit and transferring heat from refrigerant to water and extracting it from the air. Air conditioners have been around for donkeys. It's just
the same. We see it, but in every there's a thing around. Do they work when it's cold? Every modern car has a heat pump inside them.
Exactly.
And you kind of go, do you ever get into a modern car, when it's 20 degrees, -10 outside, -20 outside, and sit there and go, this is never going to warm up? It's an expectation that this technology will deliver.
Well, not only that, but you touch on something there. We worry about that -10 degree scenario where we can't warm the car up, or one, it can do it, and two, it's such a rare scenario that you just deal with it.
You don't plan for that, do you?
I mean, someone once said to me about, all right, so if I put a heat pump, whatever, I get quite a lot of electrical trips. What happens if electric trips? I says, what pumps the water on your boiler?
Your boiler's
you're
going
looking for
down
problems.
Yeah.
If you just break away from what you think, from the fact it's a heat pump, and you actually think about, get more on board with it, you're looking for reasons not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had another chat with a guy who was saying, I need to upgrade my insulation on my house, over £100,000 of insulation to make a heat pump viable. And first of all, I thought, your energy bill must cost an absolute fortune as it is now, using oil. I mean, and then, and all come to all, I worked out something like a 7 kilowatt heat loss, and a COP of 3 would actually be saving money on that property. Yeah. But we don't, some, not all, I don't know if it's a minority or majority, don't want to sort of consider. It's certainly now, me fast forwarding 10 years from when we were first into heat pumps, there's certainly a better reception of them now, and there's more industry driver. And I think the media has a lot to answer for in both cases, actually, because the media, back 2013, it was all negative stories and it was all, bad press against heat pumps. Now, because of the government agenda to go green, they're now starting to make that strategy. But you don't see adverts to educate customers on the benefits of heat pumps. You don't see a TV advert about boiler upgrade scheme, do you? You don't see much about how a heat pump can help you, unless the likes of us do it on things like podcasts and through social media. So we need to get the message out there.
It still goes back to my zeitgeist theory that maybe there is something more going on behind the scenes that is stopping us from doing this, because there's so much logical stuff that it just feels like. But I think that's what we've got time for today. I think we've set the story straight, at least, and the journey we need to go on.
Yeah, hopefully it'll change. But
I think at some point the public will start to push this. And I think just like we saw with solar, I think when that moment happens, when that trigger point happens, that's when we'll start to see a real difference.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a long trip down for you, but
my pleasure.
And I'm looking forward to going and visiting you at EBAC and seeing the facilities there.
Open door policy for anyone who's interested. We're in the northeast.
Let's do it. Let's all go up there.
Get a bus.
Get a bus. Get the bus. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks very much for watching, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.